Good evening, everyone. Welcome to you, our guest, in this scientific electronic lecture entitled The Prosodic Design of Modern Standard Arabic Political Speeches, held by the Department of English, College of Arts, University of Mosul, under the patronage of the President of the University of Mosul, Professor Dr. Qusay Kamal Ad-Din Al-Ahmadi, and under the supervision of the Dean of the College of Arts, Dr. Muhammad Ali Muhammad, along with the department's head professor, Dr. Basim Yahya Jassim. Many thanks for all of them. My name is Huda Al-Hassani, a lecturer at the University of Mosul, College of Arts, Department of English. It's my pleasure to be the moderator of this lecture. Now, let me introduce my colleague, Dr. Abbas Yunus, the presenter for this lecture about his PhD dissertation at University of York, UK. Dr. Aus, however, is currently member of the staff at University of Mosul, College of Arts, Department of English. And he is a specialist in linguistics with a special interest in phonology and discourse. So nice to have you with us today, Dr. Aus. Yet, before I'll give the floor to Dr. Aus, I'd be so grateful if you switch off your mics during the presentation, and if you have any questions, you can ask at the end of the lecture. Best of luck to you, Dr. Aus, and I wish you all the joy with his lecture, our guest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Huda. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. First of all, I would warmly welcome everyone here with us today in this lecture. And before I start the lecture, I think I will have about an hour to present the lecture. And after the hour, I will give the floor to everyone who wants to ask, discuss any point raised here in this lecture, and so that we could have a fruitful discussion by the end of this lecture, hopefully. So, as Ms. Huda said, my name is Aus Yunus. I'm a staff member in the Department of English. I have recently completed my PhD in the University of York, UK, and my thesis was entitled The Prosodic Design of Modern Standard Arabic Political Speeches. So before I would like to present my PowerPoint. So I think it's done now. Let's see. Okay, so as we said, the thesis is entitled The Prosodic Design of Modern Standard Arabic MSA Political Speeches. The aim of this study was to describe the prosodic design of modern standard Arabic political speeches, and in order to achieve this, we compared two political monologues. Monologues mean speeches produced by the same speaker, so we had two political speeches produced by the same speaker with a broadcast news reading produced by a news announcer. Through our comparison, we highlighted linguistic strategies which could be used in any genre of speech, and also what we argue to be persuasive strategies which contribute to the political work of persuasion. Additionally, through this comparison, we highlight inter and intra-speaker and/or genre variations. So it's not only comparing the two speeches, but also highlighting certain speaker or genre variations throughout the study. Of course, to achieve this again, we had to have a set of, let's say, methodology, or we had to set out criteria in order to analyze what we wanted to do. So we relied on a combination of prosodic, syntactic, and discourse semantics, evidence to account for linguistic strategies, and on a similar combination of prosodic, syntactic, and discourse, of course, with semantics and pragmatics involved to account for the persuasive strategies. So for the linguistic strategies, the set of cues that we needed, or that what was required for linguistic strategies, was prosodic, syntax, discourse, or the semantics part of the discourse. However, for the persuasive strategies, we needed extra evidence, and the extra evidence was represented in the pragmatics. So before we did our analysis, we had to set out our methodology. Of course, in such a case, when you have pragmatics involved, you need to have something called the context. And here, our aim is not to define the term. We all know that it's a very broad term to define. However, here we set out what we mean by context. So we had a whole chapter where we had certain aspects that we called context. In this chapter, we provided aspects such as specific facts, events, evidence, which are essential background to the analysis of linguistic strategies and to the analysis of political and sociolinguistic persuasive strategies. So we called our persuasive strategies political and sociolinguistic persuasive strategies, and we will come later to know why we called them political and sociolinguistic persuasive strategies. These aspects were accommodated in three general areas. So we had the general context, which is relative to both of the political speeches and news reading. And it included information such as the data. So here we describe the data. Of course, not the linguistic part of the data, because we had a whole chapter for that. So information like, for example, MSA news item, and we symbolized it as N, which is 42 seconds video file, broadcast on Al Jazeera Arabic news channel in November 2015 from a studio room, downloaded from YouTube, and we've got the reference there, labeled read aloud MSA as it was read through an auto cue system. So the news item was a read aloud MSA because it was read through an auto cue system. As for the political monologues, we had two of them, and the same speaker delivered both of these speeches. Of course, there was a difference in time and difference in the speeches themselves. So we had the first, which we called J1, because the speaker was Dr. Ibrahim al-Ja'fari. So we called the first speech J1. It's a 20-minute, 16 seconds video file, broadcast on Al Iraqiya channel in April 2006 from a studio room when the politician was Prime Minister of Iraq. Downloaded from YouTube, again with the citation, and we labeled it as semi-spontaneous MSA as it was spoken from memory. And we had the other speech, which was also delivered by al-Ja'fari, which we called J2, and this was a 12 minutes, 30 seconds video file broadcast on Al Iraqiya channel in March 2015 from a large committee hall in Egypt, which is where regular meeting of the Arab League took place, by the same politician when he was the Iraqi Minister of Foreign Affairs. Downloaded from YouTube again, and it was labeled semi-spontaneous MSA as it was spoken from memory again. Now we will come to the speakers. We will define the speakers. We will know about them. Who are they? So for the news item, we had the announcer Hassan Jammoul, a male Lebanese journalist born in 1970. He is both an announcer and a presenter, and his native vernacular is Lebanese Arabic, which we symbolize or which we label as LA. Dr. Ibrahim al-Ja'fari, a male Iraqi physician and politician born in 1947. He was the main spokesman for the Islamic Dawah Party, and he has delivered many speeches. His native vernacular is Muslim Baghdadi dialect, MB, based on the terminology used in classifying communal dialects in Baghdad, blank 1964. The audience. The audience in N, of course, audience behind TV screens, general viewers, Arab viewers in general, and for J1, again, audience behind TV screens, and the Iraqi nation in general. Who were the audience behind the TV screens? They were the Iraqi nation in general, political rivals, political allies, terrorists, terrorism, whatever. Because we'll see that in this speech there is parts delivered to the terrorist as well. There are messages delivered to the terrorist. In J2, we have a live elite audience behind TV screen, and the live elite audience are the Arab League, who are the Arab ministers of foreign affairs, accompanied by some formal representatives, plus Iraqi nation and government, Arab nations and governments, as well as terrorism. So here we identified the audience, but we did it in general terms, because when we come to the analysis, we will have more, let's say, details about these specific audiences. Now, audience in J1 and J2 here, as we said, are identified in general terms. They are later discussed in detail under the political and socio-linguistic strategy of camps of us and them. So us and them, they are camps. Us refers to, let's say, allies, supporters, and them to the enemies, terrorists, and we have grouped them under these two general terminologies. Political contexts. We also, beside general context, which contain data, speakers, audience, we have the political context. Here, of course, political context will be only relevant to J1 and J2 only in this case, because we don't have a political context for N, which is the news item. So it covered preceding and following political contexts of J1, plus the primary aim of J1. So what was the aim of J1? What was the aim of the speech? So what we did was we provided what happened, what was going on as events and political stuff before the speech, and what went as events after the speech. Again, we did the same thing for J2 as well. 3. Besides the political context and general context, we have the sociolinguistic context. Of course, here, by sociolinguistics, we know that the term is very broad, so we limited the term to setting out criteria for identification of the levels or registers of Arabic used during the delivery of J1 and J2 only. So this was restricted to J1, which is the political speeches, J1 and J2, and it was only limited to the levels of Arabic used throughout the delivery of the speeches. And these was explained under the strategy of register switch. We all know what is register switch, when you switch from one register to another, and we identified 4 registers below in a hierarchical order, from high to low. So we had the MSA high, characterized by MSA syntax, use of religious, Quranic, or historical lexemes, and consistent use of phrase internal segmental sounding forms and pausal segmental sounding forms. Phrase internal and pausal forms are indefinite endings, case endings, and feminine suffix endings. And by perfect forms of parallel structures, which means syntactically they are close or identical, semantically they are close or identical, and prosodically they are close or identical. And by prosodic here we mean the pitch configurations. So we had 2 types of parallel structures. We had perfect parallel structures and we had non-perfect parallel structures. We will come to this later throughout the analysis, and we will see what we mean by the perfect and non-perfect, and what we mean by segmental sandy, and we will come to know what is the religious Quranic lexemes or the historical lexemes. We have the second variety of Arabic here used in the speeches, which was called the broadcast MSA, characterized again by MSA syntax, use of political lexemes, inconsistent use of phrase internal segmental sandy forms at pauses. So here we have consistent use of segmental sandhi. Here we have inconsistent use of phrase internal segmental sandhi forms at pauses. So what this means is that we have two types of inconsistency in in segmental sandhi. We have phrase internal forms used at pauses. For example, when you say كتبت, for example, and you stop. Here, this is inconsistent use of this segmental sandhi. Why? Because when you say كتبت and you put the case ending there, this means that you are expecting to continue and not to stop there, because you are using a case ending here. This is what we mean by it. Or by using, for example, a pausal segmental sandhi in phrase internal position. So, for example, you say كتبت and you don't stop. You keep going on. So this is also inconsistent use of segmental sandhi. This is what we mean by segmental sandhi. We mean feminine suffix ending, case endings, and indefinite endings. So we have two types of inconsistent use. We have the phrase internal, which is segmental at pauses, which is associated with the broadcast MSA, and we have the other inconsistent use of pausal segmental sandhi, which we related to MSA low. And the consistent use, we related it to MSA high. This is concerning the segmental sandhi only, because as we can see, there are other characteristics that differentiate or distinguish between these four levels. MB, which is the Muslim Baghdadi dialect, it is characterized, of course, by MB lexis, MB syntax. It has its own syntax, it has its own lexical items, and it's characterized by absence of consistent use of segmental sandhi. We all know that in dialect, these kinds of fusha features disappear in dialect. So nobody in dialect use, for example, even if it's in Baghdadi, you say gilitle. So you don't say gilitlu or something, you don't put case endings there. In dialect, it's lost. So there is absence of segmental sandhi in MB dialect. And it's also characterized by non-perfect parallel structures. And as we said, non-perfect parallel structures or forms, here we mean that they are only identical in the semantics and syntax, and they are not identical in the pitch configurations, in prosody. So we have perfect parallel structures where we have all three identical or close, the syntax, the semantics, and the prosody represented in pitch configurations, and we have the non-perfect, which is characterized by only identical or close forms of syntax and semantics with no prosody there. Now we will move to our methodology. Of course, the context can serve as a methodology. However, by methodology here, we mean the linguistic methodology. So as clear up to now, we are dealing with prosody, and we are dealing with syntax, we are dealing with discourse. So what we did is that we tried to provide a grammar for all of these three linguistic aspects. And of course, we had difficulty in doing so. Why? Because we all know that the prosody of, or the intonation of MSA is not established yet. So it's not there. Even in longer stretches of talk, in a discourse, for example, nobody has done it before. So we had a problem here because we had to work it all out. We had to go to the analysis. We had to rely heavily on the analysis in order to form a grammar for the intonation of modern standard Arabic broadcast form. Again, the syntax, yes, it is established for modern standard Arabic, and we didn't have a problem with the syntax, but for the discourse, we also had a problem again, because again, we had no studies to rely on in regards to the discourse of modern standard Arabic and how it works. How does it work? Does it start with a lexical item, and does it move all the way to a global topic? How does it work? This was our problem. So we had to work all of this out. We had to rely heavily on our data in order to put all of these terminologies out there and set criteria for other people who are willing to work on these topics. So here we set out methodology for identification of prosodic, syntactic, and discourse cues separately, of course. We don't triangulate them now here. We will triangulate them later. So for prosodic cues, we covered intonation, we covered tempo, which is pause, and this means unfilled pause, not filled pause. Intensity, which means loudness. We covered segmental sandhi, and we already discussed what we mean by segmental sandhi. And F0 height, okay, which means pitch height, and expansion of pitch, which means the lengthening of pitch at the boundary tones. And we covered F0 end of boundary tones. So the final bits at the boundary tones, or the final tail of the pitch at the boundary tone, we also measured that here for the prosodic cues. Intonational and temporal cues here, likewise syntactic and discourse cues, to follow shortly, are described as intonational, temporal, syntactic, and discourse structure of various sizes above the level of the word. So what we were trying to do, we were trying to provide structures for the intonation, for the pauses, for the syntax, for the discourse, all above the level of the word. So we were not interested in what is beneath the level of the word. We were interested in what comes after the level of the word, up to the level of a paragraph or a global topic. That's what we were interested in. So we discussed these structure under the tenets of intonational, temporal, syntactic, and discourse hierarchies. So these structures were all set down in hierarchy, in a dominance. So the order of dominance in these hierarchies are based on different formal and similar functional cues at the right edges of the various sized structures. So we depended on, or we relied on, formal cues, and we relied on similar functional cues. What we mean by similar functional cues here is that the functional cues that we adopted, we applied it to intonation, we applied it to pauses, we applied it to syntax, and we even applied it to discourse. But the formal cues were all different. So let's go to the intonational hierarchy and see what we mean by the intonational hierarchy and what it covers. So formal cues include tonality, which is the strength of the disjuncture, tone, which means shape of contours, and tonicity. Of course, tone, tonality, and tonicity is terminologies used by Halliday. This was the formal cues for the intonation. Formal cues are motivated by intonational studies on some of the Arabic vernaculars, for example, Shehel, 1999, for Lebanese Arabic, Helmuth, 2004, 2011, 2012, for Egyptian Arabic, and Helmuth, 2014, for Egyptian and Jordanian Arabic. Of course, Dr. Helmuth was my supervisor, and she was the one who used to work on intonation and intonation variation in the Arabic dialect. So a mixture of auditory and acoustic descriptions of the pitch, which is the perceptual correlate of F0, using Pratt. So acoustic descriptions, we used Pratt, and we all know auditory descriptions, you heavily rely on your ear, what you hear. So as for the acoustic descriptions, we relied on Pratt. Pratt is a computer software for speech analysis, and we've got the reference here as well. A mixture, of course, a mixture of auto-segmental metrical approach, AM, Pierre Humbert, 1980, and Ladd, and British School. So we had a mixture. So our intonational structures were motivated by a mixture of what the auto-segmental people came out with and what the British School came out with. So it was a mixture of both. And not only these, we also relied on our own analysis, and we used Pratt in order to establish our intonational structures. Functional cues rely on shapes of contours to hypothesize semantic roles of continuity, which means there is more to come, and finality, there is nothing more to say. So functional cues here, continuity and finality, of course, we applied them to all of those cues that we had. So we applied them to intonation, we applied them to pause, we applied them to syntax, and we applied them to the discourse. So this functional part was motivated by Swartz and Gullikens on prosody of semi-spontaneous Dutch monologues, and the semantic roles are further subdivided into lower higher continuations and lower higher finalities. Of course, we went further and we divided and we subdivided continuity and finality into lower higher continuations and lower higher finalities. The semantic roles of continuity and finality are also hypothesized at the right edges of syntactic discourse structures to follow shortly, but for the syntax and discourse, we were motivated by Dickens' 2010 on the functional analysis of syntactic and discourse edges of MSA narratives. So again, we used the same terminologies for syntax and discourse, which means continuity and finality at the edges, but for that, we were motivated by Dickens and not Swartz and Gullikens, who were motivated for our pauses and intonational cues. Different leveled semantic roles proposed at edges of all linguistic structures are primarily deduced from the formal cues at the edges of each hierarchical linguistic structure. So we, as I told you, we heavily relied on the formal cues in order to come out with the structures that we came out with. Therefore, each hierarchical form is isomorphic to its equivalent hierarchical function. So, which means that when you have a level 2 structure in intonation, it is isomorphic to its functional part, which is continuity, because it's a lower level. So this is what we mean by it. And the following table summarizes these intonational structures above the level of the phonological word in the intonational hierarchy for broadcast MSA. So we had level 2, 3, 4, and 5. All of these levels are above the level of the word. And here we are talking about intonation, of course. So we had the level 2, which was called lower continued intermediate phrase, and we abbreviated as LCIP. And this was let's say, marked by a non-falling phrase tone or a falling phrase tone. We had the level 3, which was a higher continued intonational phrase, HCIP, which was marked by a non-falling boundary tone. And we had our lower final intonational phrase, LFIP, level 4, which was also marked by a falling level tone and a non-falling high level tone, and boundary tone. And we had a level 5, which was the higher final compound intonational phrase, HFCIP, and this was marked by a lower fall than this fall in level 4. So this is how we came up with these structures. We had formal cues and we had functional cues in order to decide what level is for each, let's say, intonational structure. As for the temporal hierarchy, as we said, tempo stands for unfilled pause, which means the duration of pause, which is measured semi-automatically using Pratt. Of course, Pratt has this feature where you can measure everything in regards to prosody, whatever you want. If you know how to use it, you can measure whatever you want in it. So we measured the pauses there, and it was done semi-automatically. Durations are extracted. We placed the boundaries manually after zooming in for 4 times in order not to include any portions of the pause within the extracts of the speech. Now, relying on the averages of the durations of unfilled pauses at the right edges of intonational, syntactic, and discourse structures above the level of the word across J1, J2, and N, so across all three speeches, as in the figure below, 4 temporal structures for broadcast MSA are hypothesized. So what we did is we looked at the durations of pauses at each level of structure. So we looked at the pauses at the end of, for example, level 2 intonational structures, level 3 intonational structures, and we did the same for the syntax, level 2 syntactic structure, and the same with discourse structures. And we came out with the following figure, which shows why we hypothesize this. This is a justification why we hypothesize 4 levels of, or 4 structures of pauses. And here we are. The following table summarizes the temporal structures in the temporal hierarchy for broadcast MSA. Again, we have level 2 up to level 5, and each one of these are called low continued extra short pause, which we mark as this, and it's also characterized by null up to 100 milliseconds. So this is the formal part of it, and this is the functional part of it. So this is characterized, this level 2 pause is characterized by null duration up to 100 milliseconds. The level 3 is characterized by 0.100 millisecond up to 0.400 millisecond, and it goes up to 1.00 milliseconds, which is the duration used for level 5 temporal structures. For the syntactic cues, the various size syntactic structures in the hierarchy are identified and segmented by relying on syntactic parsing. So we used syntactic parsing in order to come up with our 4 structures. The syntactic parsing was adopted from works on English syntax, Hereford 1994, and Epler and Ozone 2013, and from works on MSA syntax example writing 2005 and Dickens 2010, and from the overall syntactic design of the MSA data in the present work. So we were motivated by other studies. However, we also relied on our own analysis, and it took me like 3 years in order to analyze the 3 speeches that I had with all of these linguistic aspects. So I really took my time in the analysis, but however, at the end it was fruitful because the analysis showed me or laid the path for me in order to hypothesize such structures. Now, this is the syntactic hierarchy, and these are the syntactic structures in these hierarchy. Again, we have an order of dominance. So we have level 5 is the highest level, and we have level 2 is the lowest level, and all of these are, again, above the level of the word or the syntactic word. So we have level 2, which we call lower continued syntactic phrase. It's syntactic phrase. Level 3, we called it higher continued clause. Level 4, we called it lower final illocutionary clause. And level 5 was called higher final illocutionary clause. So here, level 5 is like the level of a paragraph. Here, level 4 is like the level of a sentence. Here, level 3 is like the level of a clause. And level 2 is like the level of a phrase. As for the discourse cues, discourse structures, of course, we relied on a combination of hierarchical and categorical analysis. The analysis involves general, global, and/or specific local conceptualizations of the text into various sized semantically defined chunks. It adapts categorical discourse structures used for English from Wichmann for broadcast speech and from Zeller's 2011 for a controlled narrative story. So for our categorical part, we used Wichmann. We were motivated by Wichmann and Zeller's. However, for our hierarchical part, we were influenced by our own analysis. So the categorical discourse structures are correlated within a proposed hierarchical explanation of discourse structure. The hierarchy is constructed by relying on tie or strength of meaning at those edges. So what our cue, the cue that we depended on in order to decide what level is the discourse structure, was the tie or strength of meaning at that part. So is it finished? Does it still need more to be completed? And this is where we got our functional cues of continuity and finality, and we applied it to all of them, which is estimated by levels of completeness of idea at edges of different sized discourse structures in the flow of the data. So this is our discourse hierarchy, and we have 4 levels: lower continued lexical phrase, and we've got higher continued local topic, we've got lower final local topic, of course lower and these are what? This is a lower continuation, this is a higher continuation. Here we have what? We have finality, but again it's a local finality, it's not a global finality yet. It's not the end of a topic or a paragraph, it's just an end of the sentence. And here the level 4 was further categorically analyzed into new topics, which we marked as N, which means the start of a paragraph or the start of a new topic. And we had A, which means additions. So addition means that you are adding to the idea, you are still going on. And we had R, which is reformulation, which means that you are using the same idea and you are just reformulating the idea. And all of these, we again, as we will see later in our analysis, we have symbolized these by color. So N, we put a red color for N, A, we put a blue color for A, and for reformulation, we put a yellow color in order to understand what semantic category they belong to. Now, before we go to the analysis, what we did is that we had 2 types of results. We had this thing going on after we finished our methodology. We had analyzed all the speeches, so we had all the cues, we had all the structures. So we wanted to give an overview of the data, of what we have done until now. So what we did was we covered frequencies of occurrences of intonational, temporal, syntactic, and discourse cues, in addition to other phenomena like filled pauses, self-repairs, inconsistent application of phrase internal forms at pauses, which means segmental sandy, across both speakers in all 3 data samples. Of course, what we were looking here was for general variation and speaker variation. So we were looking for inter and intra variations. Frequencies of occurrences allowed us to highlight, as we said, inter and intra-speaker or general variations and similarities, which led to a number of generalizations when looking at the frequencies of occurrences of these cues separately or in relationship with each other. So we did not only look at them separately, we also triangulated these cues together. So, for example, the relation between prosody and discourse. What is the relation between intonation and discourse? What is the relation between pause and discourse? What is the relation between pause and syntax? What is the relation between intonation and syntax? So we had them together in a relationship, and we also looked at them separately as they sit. Durations of temporal structures in J1 and J2 were relatively longer than that in N. So in J1 and J2, which means the political speeches here, were relatively longer. So the durations were relatively longer than the ones found in the news item. What else? We had more temporal structures, we had more pauses produced in J1 and J2 than that in N. So there were more pauses in the political speeches than that in the news item. Of course, this was possibly due to semi-spontaneous conditions of J1 and J2 as compared to read-aloud conditions of N. And or the information in J1 and J2 is of importance to the speaker and the audience, while information in N is of importance to the audience only. That is personal versus non-personal information. So what for those who don't know what we mean by semi-spontaneous and read aloud, and why here we have more pauses and why we have longer pauses, it means here that the reader or the speaker is not looking at a piece of paper. He doesn't have a piece of paper in front of him. He's speaking out of memory. So for him to speak fluently, he will need to rephrase the stuff all in his brain before talking. So this will take time. He will put more pauses there. He will have more durations. He will have more stops. In contrast, the announcer who is reading a news item is reading it from an auto cue system, and he does not have difficulty in any way of reading what's in front of him because it's put there in front of him. Now, these two facts resemble what Castro and de Moraes 2008 found. They found that pauses in Brazilian Portuguese news are fewer and shorter than those in political speeches. Now, durations of temporal structures in J2, of course, these are all generalizations. Now, durations of pauses in J2 are also relatively longer than that in J1. So we have the same speaker, who is Al-Ja'fari, and he has two speeches. And in J2, the durations of pauses that he produces in J2 are longer than that in J1. Now, why is that? Now, we said possibly this is due to the presence of an elite live audience in J2. As we said, when we were putting out our general context, we said J2 was in the Arab League. It was an Arab League meeting, okay, جامعة الدول العربية. There was a live audience. While J1 was in a studio room in the TV, and the politician was delivering it from a studio room. There was no live audience. So probably this was because of the presence of an elite live audience. The other generalization is that pauses in J1 and J2 are designed as follows: longer in the start and the middle of the speeches and shorter towards the end of the speeches. Now, why is this? Why is this? Because due to approaching time limit as the speaker gets near to the end in broadcast settings. We all know that in broadcast settings, they give you a certain amount of time and they say you've got 1 hour to finish this speech. So first of all, he will not rush it. He will not rush the speech, but when he comes to the end of the speech, he will start rushing the speech. And that's why the pauses towards the end of the speeches are shorter in contrast to the start and the middle of the speech. Now, this was when we looked at pauses separately. Now, when we related pauses, for example, to syntactic and discourse structures, what did we find? Now, when temporal structures in N coincide with syntactic and discourse structures, we found that they are more frequently in isomorphic relationships. Now, what we mean by isomorphic relationships means that a level 2 pause coincides with a level 2 syntactic or discourse structure, and so on. Level 3 coincides with a level 3 syntactic. So we have an isomorphic relationship here. Then a non-isomorphic one. Also, a large number of temporal structures coincide with non-syntactic and or non-discourse structures. And here what we mean by these, it means that edges that do not reflect any of the structures in the hierarchies. So, which means that it's still not a phrase yet. It's still not a clause yet. It's still not a sentence yet. It's still not a paragraph yet. So edges that do not reflect any of the structures that we highlighted earlier. This is what we call non-syntactic or non-discourse structures. Level 5 syntactic and discourse structures in J1 and J2 are more frequently associated with level 4 temporal structures. So with the edge, which level 5 means edge of a paragraph, edge of a global topic. So in J1 and J2, these were more frequently associated with level 4 structures. And this is non-isomorphic because what was expected here was a level 5 pause, not level 4. And this was possibly due to the greater lengths of J1 and J2, which forced the speaker to consider the time limit in broadcast settings. But in N, we did not have this problem. In N, which was the news reading, we had a level 5 syntactic discourse structure, which was isomorphic with a level 5 pause structure. Durations of pauses in J1 and J2, when in non-isomorphic relationships with syntactic or discourse structures, or with non-syntactic or non-discourse, are frequently longer in durations than those in N. So pauses which were produced in non-isomorphic places, they were longer in duration than those in N. So what does this mean? This means that possibly, again, we will go back to the idea of personal information in J1 and J2 as opposed to non-personal information in N. For N, I mean, the announcer is just doing his job. He's just reading, and that's it. He's just delivering the news. But in J1 and J2, the speaker is attached to his speech. He has written the speech. He has rehearsed it several times. He has an aim behind the speech. He wants to tell the people something. So this is what we mean by personal information versus non-personal information. Temporal markings of isomorphic and non-isomorphic syntactic and or discourse. Of course, this will keep going on because this was a very huge study. I mean, it was about 437 pages, and I have 50 slides, and I didn't finish all what I wanted to say. And now I think I have only 10 minutes to finish everything I have, and this is a problem for me. So I will leave the overview. I mean, these are results, which are, I mean, anybody can read it. It's all there in the thesis, and you are welcome even to have these slides if you want, because I want to move quickly to the linguistic strategies, which is the aim of this study. As we said, we wanted to show linguistic strategies in the political speeches and persuasive strategies as well. So the role of prosody as doing linguistic strategies and doing persuasive strategies. So this is done by resorting, again, how we came up with these strategies. We went back to the isomorphic and non-isomorphic relations that we discussed in the previous section. So these were all built on stats. We had stats for each one. Of course, I didn't have time to put stats for each of those because it's only a 1-hour lecture. So we depended heavily on our analysis. We wanted to see, okay, we depended on the isomorphic and non-isomorphic relations between right edges of intonational structures and the right edges of syntactic and discourse structures. So here, what we are interested in is only how prosody is related to discourse and syntax. And that's it. So by prosody here, I mean intonation and pause. Of course, we do have other cues, and the other cues are more, they work with the persuasive strategies and not linguistic strategies, as we will see. So as a result of resorting to such relations, we had two general categories, which we called matches and mismatches. So match was simply an isomorphic relationship. It means that the edges match. It means that the edge of an intonational structure here matches with an edge of a syntactic structure. They are the same level. Level 2 matches with the level 2. Level 3 matches with the level 3. And this is what we mean by match. Of course, mismatch, on the other hand, means that whatever deviates from a match is a mismatch. And we had two types of those. We had when syntactic or discourse domains were cued with non-corresponding intonation domains. For example, a level 2 syntactic structure being mapped with a level 3 intonational structure. So this is not isomorphic. Or when an intonational structure maps a non-discourse edge or a non-syntactic edge, which means that which has no relevance to the structures that we highlighted earlier in the hierarchies. So this is how it was motivated, and we interpreted them. What is a mismatch? What is a match? I want to go quickly to the examples. So here we have exemplifying linguistic strategies. We have matches at level 2 structures. Here it means that the intonation, the pause, level 2, both of them, they coincide with a level 2 syntactic edge or a level 2 discourse edge. Now let's have an example. Here we have أنني أراجع نفسي. So here أنني is the phrase. أراجع نفسي, here we have, this is prosodically, we have this is the transliteration, this is the level 2, level 3, this is the boundary tones, the edge tones, and this is the durations of pauses. X means that this is a null pause, there is no duration here. It means there is a boundary, but there is no pause duration. So the boundary is here, exactly, it's here. And what does it mark? It marks what? It marks a phrase. It marks a lexical phrase or a syntactic phrase. So here we have what we call an isomorphic relationship between intonation on the one hand, because we have a level 2 intonational structure here, and also a level 2 pause structure or a temporal structure again. So here we have an isomorphic relationship at level 2. At level 3, and here we are talking about أشار بإصبعه إلى أرض بغداد. This is a local clause, or let's say a level 3 clause, okay, and it's marked by a level 3 intonational structure and also a level 3 temporal structure. Again, here we have an isomorphic relationship between the cues here. And this is, of course, the figure from Pratt. This is the figure from Pratt. Why I put the figure here is because with persuasive strategies, we will need this figure in order to show you how prosody can be a persuasive strategy. And it will be all clear when we come to those strategies. Again, matches at level 4 structures. Here again, we have the same thing. So we have a sentence here. Let's call it a sentence just for the argument. It's a sentence, and we have a level 4 intonational structure, and we've got a level 4 temporal structure, and they are all in isomorphic relationships. And with level 5, which means this is the edge of a paragraph or an edge of a global topic. Of course, all of these symbols are all, we took them earlier, the structures. So this is how we presented our examples. So it starts from here up to Wal-Houthiyyin. This is from the news item, and we can see that here we have a lower fall, which is a level 5 intonational structure, and we have a pause that exceeds 1, which is a level 5 temporal structure, and we have also the edge of what? The edge of a paragraph, which is level 5. So here, all of these cues are isomorphic with each other, and this is why we have a match. And this is what we mean by linguistic strategy, because by linguistic strategy we mean that the prosody here is marking the flow of the speech, and it's marking the demarcation of the flow of the speech. So it's telling us that here there is a phrase, here there is a sentence, here there is a topic or a global topic, here there is a paragraph. So only by relying on prosody alone, without going back to the meaning or to the lexical words or to the syntax, we can tell that, for example, there is a pause here, there is a phrase here, there is a sentence here, there is a clause here, and there is a paragraph here, only by relying on prosodical features. Now, these are mismatches due to immediate self-repairs. We all know what self-repairs are. When you commit a mistake and you start and you immediately correct yourself. So not that much interesting, but they are also linguistic strategies. So all of these are linguistic strategies. Let's go to the persuasive strategies. Of course, we've called them persuasive strategies or sociolinguistics and or political persuasive strategies. Of course, here we needed extra stuff in order to motivate our argument. Again, we had the mismatches and matches, which we used previously, but what we included, not only intonation and pause, now for the prosody, we had further cues, and for the discourse, we had further cues, and even for the context, we had further cues, because for the linguistic strategies, we did not need the socio-linguistic and the political context that we highlighted earlier. We only used the general context and the linguistic context. However, when we came to the persuasive strategies, we made use of the political context and the socio-linguistic context, besides putting extra discourse features and extra prosodic features. For example, prosodic features included pitch height, pitch expansion, loudness, parallel pitch configurations, which may or not accompanied by, which means segmental Sandy as well. So all of these were, besides edge tones and pauses, all of these were considered when we were looking for persuasive strategies. This was for the prosody. Now we will move to the context. We already mentioned that we used the sociolinguistic and political context. As for the discourse features, we added a new concept which we called critical information. So besides our categorical semantic functions that we did earlier on with the linguistic strategies, now we had a different thing. We had pragmatics included now in this chapter. So here we defined the term critical information. Of course, it was borrowed from Stranger 2005, but however, we added to the term. For us, the definition means that it's particularly significant to the speaker and or audience. So information which is of interest to the speaker or audience. And how do we know that? We know that by going back to the context. We know that by going back to the context. And not only this, we will see what else we did in order to decide what is critical and what is not critical. So, as we said, it was deduced by going back to the context, and also is further supported by classifying the lexical semantic usage in J1 and J2. So what we did extra was that the lexical items used, we tried to classify them according to three general categories. We had the negative category, which are lexical items which suggest, of course, this was in a speech act theory, so which suggests meanings such as shaming, blaming, disgracing, falsifying, diminishing, etc. These meanings are mainly associated with camps of them in J1 and J2, and they imply enemies or opponents. Positive was praising, glorifying, hoping, wishing, gratitude, respect. All of these were positive, and we had neutral speech acts, or let's say neutral lexical items, where there was no negativity or positivity in the speech. It was just normal narration, and it applied to everyone in J1 and J2, as well as to both camps. So positive and negative meanings may occur separately or together, and when they occur together, we have juxtapositions between positive and negative meanings as well. So this is, what we are doing here, we were motivating the term critical information. Now, relating these categories to the context is crucial, as what may seem positive from the surface meaning may actually imply negative meaning instead. And we all know that. I mean, you can just mock somebody in a positive way, but what you mean really is that you're intentionally hurting them. There is a negative side to it. So you wouldn't know that if you're not familiar with the political context or the context itself. You can't just come and depend on the surface meaning and say, okay, this is positive, I will label it as positive. No, you will have to go back and see what the context is in order to decide if this carries a positive meaning or a negative meaning. So what else we had with these was something called invalidating speech acts by Latif, which we called, which is a kind of strategic maneuvering. Of course, we didn't call it like that, but we used what we say manipulating speech acts. So we call this manipulating speech act, which is also used to refer to cases where a chunk or a group of chunks in a sequence appear as if indicating a specific speech act based on the meaning of the lexical items only, but however, there is an implicit force there and it means something else. We will come to this and see in the examples. Now, of course, let's go straight forward to the, prosodic focus. This was one of the designs that we highlighted as serving as a persuasive strategy. What is prosodic focus? It is, for example, we had cues like height, pitch height, higher than usual, louder than usual, and more expanded. So here, for example, when we look at this example, al-Masa'ib wa al-Intisarat. Here, he's talking about Palestine, of course, and this is in the Arab League meeting, and this is easily a camp of us against the camp of them, who were the Israelis, okay? And here what he is doing, look here, we have pitch height here, we have pitch height here, they are unusual, they are abnormal, they are so high, we have extended pitch here, we have extended pitch here, and also loudness. Of course, all of these were measured and we have estimations for all of them. However, as I said, we just don't have time to provide all of these stuff. But these are not based on auditory matters only, but on acoustics, and we had estimations for all of these. Again, so as we see that the prosodic focus here is correlating with what? With critical information. So here again, we have Shahid al-Asr al-Azim. Oh, sorry, Shahid al-Asr al-Azim. Okay, al-Asr al-Azim. Here he was talking about Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. And as we see that here, look here, this is a late focus. Before a while, we took something called early focus, which is at the beginning and not at the end near the boundary. But this one is near the boundary. So here we have what we call a late prosodic focus. And here we have expansion, we have loudness, we have pitch height, we have everything. Again, here prosodic focus is correlating with critical information. And here the critical information, by the way, is appealing to authority, which is also a textual-based strategy. So we have two kinds of strategies correlating with each other. We have the prosodic-based strategy and we have the textual-based strategy, and this is how this is what the politician is doing in order to grab the attention of the audience. Now we have another prosodic-based strategy which we call prosodic promotion. Now here, the prosodic focus also correlates with critical information. Of course, again, here we have a correlation between critical information and prosodic promotion. And by prosodic promotion, we mean that, for example, you have a level 2 edge or syntactic edge, and what you have there is a level 4, for example, intonational structure, or a level 4 temporal structure. So there is a promotion. There is a promotion in the prosody here. And as we saw, this was only happening when we had critical information. For example, here, of course, critical information can map the critical information itself, or it can precede the critical information itself. So, as if we go back, this was the definition, but I'm rushing things out right now because I know there's a lot of things to say. So here, فَلِذَلِكَ, of course, this precedes what? This precedes critical information. But look how he marked it. There is what? There is pitch height here. Sorry, look, there is prosodic focus as well here, besides prosodic promotion. So we have what? We have level 3 intonational structure. We have what? A level 4 temporal structure. Marking what? Marking a level 2 syntactic structure. So this gives us an indication that there is something important coming after this. And this was the case, because here what the politician was talking, he was saying that فَلِذَلِكَ أَنَا وَاجَهْتُ الْكَثِيرَ مِنَ الْمَشَاكِلِ وَأَنَا أَتَصَدَّى لِلْمَسْئُولِيَّةِ. So here he's talking about himself. We have this ego, we have this power. Here he's revealing that he is powerful, that he did not, that they could not break him, although he went through a lot of difficulties. Here we have another example. This was from J2. كل المشاكل. So كل المشاكل here is again preceding what? It's preceding critical information. Again, we have promotion here. As you can see here, we have also prosodic focus. Look at the pitch height here. There is loudness, there is lengthening, there is everything here. And this was preceding what? كل المشاكل تمظهرت بأشكال مختلفة ولكن المحرك خلفها واحد. This was said in a meeting where there was a lot of representatives there, Arab representatives. And here what he means that terrorism, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all of them, they had different faces, but all of them were generated by one source. And we all know what he means there. He was referring to Saudi Arabia there. So here we have critical information. Here this was preceding critical information. And this is easily marked by prosody. We have parallel structures again. Now here parallel structures, as we said, we have two types of them. We have the perfect and non-perfect. Perfect is the one that we are interested in. Why? Because we have identical pitch configurations. And we will see this. So the politician employing perfect part might have been reinforcing certain speaker or audience-oriented ideas. So through chaining eloquent and cohesive strings of syntactic, semantic, and prosodic forms, which is one of the criteria to signal the use of the prestigious MSA high. So by using perfect parallel structures, which is also a signal that the speech is going to a high register. Again, this is what? This is a prosodic-based design. This is a persuasive strategy. As we can see, this is what? نحن نقاتل بالنيابة. Here, if you look carefully at this whole pitch, look at it carefully. نحن نقاتل بالنيابة. Now, let's go to the next one. نحن نقدم بالنيابة. This is what? This is a parallel structure. But look what is happening with the prosody. As you can see, this is identical to the previous one. It's identical pitch configuration. Again, here, what do we have? We have critical information. So here we have a prosodic-based strategy correlating with a textual-based strategy at the same time. Here he's talking about what? About the sacrifices. He's talking about the sacrifices that Iraq has made instead of all of the humanity and the Arab countries themselves. So here he goes on, نحن نقاتل بالنيابة، نحن نقدم بالنيابة، ولكننا نتعشم بكم أن تكونوا على مستوى هذه المسؤولية, because he is requesting for support. But here, even the request for support is not as it seems, because he is putting an obligation there. So what he is doing really is manipulating the Speech Act itself. So he says, you are obliged to help Iraq. You are obliged to support Iraq. Why? Because Iraq is in the first line defending you guys against ISIS. So again, so broadcast MSA, there is also a fifth, which is there is also a fifth, let's say, prosodic-based strategy, which is done by segmental Sandy, and it has a role in deciding the register shift or register switch between the different levels that we have already identified. Because we said broadcast MSA is the usual platform language produced in J1 and J2. And it is from this level where the switching occurs. So it goes lower to the MB dialect or to MSA law, or it goes higher to the MSA. And this is all, of course, nobody has said this before. Why? Because we all know that previous studies on register switch are all about lexical items. Nobody has said that register switch can be achieved through prosody. This is the first study that says this. And nobody, all political-based studies, when they tackle register switch, they all look for downward direction. So what the shifts from a higher to a lower register. However, here in this study, we looked for a shift from a lower level to a higher level. And again, something done by prosody. So this, I mean, there's a lot of contributions in the study, and I wish I had a lot of time to explain everything. However, I hope that I made a point here, because I mean, we took 5 prosodic-based strategies, persuasive strategies, and we have several textual-based strategies in this chapter, and I can name them here. I have put them here. We've got the camps of us and them, we've got non-perfect parallelism, we've got all of these negative positive meanings, we've got intertextuality, we've got historical quotes, Quranic quotes, several textual-based strategies, and all of these are explained separately in this chapter, and they all correlate with what? With prosody. So they don't occur alone. Yes, they are critical information. However, the prosody is playing a role there. Prosody is correlating with this critical information, and this is how persuasion is achieved, and this is how politicians grab audiences' attention. So there is always this hidden part, which, I mean, everybody is aware of it, but actually nobody has talked about it, which is the prosody of political speeches. And thank you very much, and I hope that I did not cross the time. And these are the references, of course. And now, if there is any questions, I would gladly answer any concerns or questions or anything.
Well, thanks, Dr. Aus, for this wonderful lecture. Now I'll return to you, our guest, if you have any questions, as Dr. Aus asked now, to be answered by him. Any questions? Well, do you have any questions, our guests?
Yes, please. I have a question.
Yes, please.
Well, thank you, Dr. Aus, for this marvelous presentation. We learned about prosody today, and what I liked about mostly is the way you pronounce. The pronunciation is very beautiful. I always say that a person who teaches phonetics or phonology should have a clear, either a clear American accent or a British accent, and that you were perfectly British. I liked it very much. My question is that from your title, you're talking about political speeches.
Yes.
And what I understand from your whole thesis, you've tackled al-Ja'fari. My question is, why al-Ja'fari? And if I have taken another political, some political famous person, I'm sure the whole thesis will be different. My question is, why al-Ja'fari in precise? Thank you very much.
Well, actually, that's a very nice question, and I was also faced by that question in the Viva. However, when you're in England, you don't have access to all of these stuff. So I had no political reasons in choosing the data, of course. I had no political reasons. So my criteria of selection was not on political basis. What I did was that the first 2 speeches delivered by the same speaker, and there was a time range between the 2 speeches, I went for it immediately. So that was the point behind everything. So I just wanted to see, does it change or not? Is the prosody changing or not? Of course, I couldn't explain everything here because it's only 1 hour. But as I mean, J2, we have a claim in the thesis that J2, which is with the live audience, is even more persuasive than J1. And because of the prosodic features there are more salient. They are more, for example, the pitch height is more higher, the expansions are more longer, and it's more louder. So we have estimations for everything. I mean, this was what we were looking for. We were looking for intra and inter-speaker variations or general variations. So that's why we took a news item, a different speaker, and that's also why we took the same speaker delivering 2 speeches. and with different audience. We wanted to see if there's a difference in the prosody. That's the only reason why.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Our guests?
I'm sorry, but I have just some curiosity. Why did you
go
refer to his name in the title of the thesis? Or
Yes,
are you just doing it general?
I know what you mean. Actually, I mean, this was, I had this question like many times. Well, for me, I told you I was not politically driven. That was the point. I was not looking for fame, or I didn't want to put his name there in order not to take it to another direction. And
Yeah,
you know
it will
what
be
I
taken
mean.
to another direction. That's
Yeah,
true.
you know what I mean. Because
Yes,
I
I do.
looked at the speeches like from a linguist point of view, and that's it. No politics at all. But if I put his name in the title, it would be totally different.
Of
It
course
would
it
be
would.
totally different. You know what's happening with the social media nowadays. I mean,
Yes,
you saw
you'll
what
be in
happened
trouble,
to that
believe
poor
me.
guy. Yeah,
Okay, thank you very much again.
you're welcome. Yes, any other questions?
Any other questions for Dr. Aus?
Well, if I knew that there were no questions, I wouldn't rush the presentation. I mean, I missed a lot of things.
I think I have another question.
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Dunya, this is not fair. I had a question.
Oh, if you have a question, go ahead. Go ahead. I was just going to talk about the
Yes,
conclusion.
please.
It has
Yes,
so many
finally.
things.
Okay,
Speech
thank
acts
you
and
so
that
much.
stuff.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Aus. That was a very, that was a very nice presentation, of course. And you know my opinion of your title of your thesis. It was very interesting since it is tackling two areas in one area. But my question is that, do you think that a prosodic analysis is also applicable to other fields rather than a political discourse or not?
Definitely, if you want my opinion on that, I would say 100%, especially if it's a spoken text.
Okay.
Whenever you have something spoken, you have to look for prosody, because that you will have always, there is a missing part. I mean, you can't take a spoken text and go to the written part of it and leave a full field, let's say, of an interesting field. You will find interesting stuff in the prosody, by the way, especially if it's spoken. But if you leave that part and you just go for the written form of the text, there will be always something missing, always missing.
I see. I wish you could name one area for us. Yani, for example, another type of discourse or another type of data.
Any other spoken discourse, doctor, any other spoken discourse. I mean, you can have, I have an idea, for example, of doing something, but I know it will take a long time because these studies are not easy. It took me 5 years to finish this, and I ended up with 437 pages of the thesis. So it was a very bulky thesis.
I should have a look at your suggestions for further studies, of course.
Yeah, there's a lot of things there. There's a lot of contributions, and I recommend everyone to read it. It's there in Google Scholar, in ResearchGate, in White Rose Library. The thesis is everywhere. I mean, you can have a look. I'm sure you will come to those parts where you will get interested, as I was. Also, as I said, I have an idea of religious speeches. I mean, I want to see how it could be persuasive. What makes it persuasive? What makes, for example, when you listen to a religious speech, you feel like, okay, there is something. I'm agreeing with everything. Why are you agreeing? with no conscience at all. I think prosody is playing a part there as well. So I want to see that, but I know that this will take a whole lot of time, time, because you will be doing two things, as you said. You will be doing the discourse part, and you will be doing the prosodic part, which is not easy at all, especially when it comes to Arabic, because we all know that in Arabic there is nothing established yet. So you will need to work it all out from scratch, and that's what the difficulties that we are facing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Dr. Aus. Thank you. That was very interesting and very informative. Thank you.
Yes, any other questions, please? Well, I don't think anybody has any questions anymore. So,
okay.
Yes, what do you think, Ms. Huda?
Well, if you don't have any questions, our guests, I think we should finish our event today. It was really actually an amazing and so special lecture and so special topic to talk about, especially in a PhD. I wish you all the best, Dr. Aus, and we are thanking you again and again. Actually, it has been so great to have you here with us today in this scientific gathering. God bless you. Wish you all the best in your further research and studies too. Also, I want to thank all of you, our guests, for your attending and effective participations, challenging the lockdown and the bad extraordinary circumstances represented by COVID-19 pandemic. God bless you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Huda.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again for everyone who attended and for everyone who commented and for everyone who asked and discussed. And I hope the best for everyone here today. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your patience, and thank you for attending.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aus. God bless you all. And have a nice night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Great job, guys.